Welcome to Atheists Talk. I'm George Kane, the president of Minnesota Atheists, and I'm the host tonight. One of the great religious icons of the 20th century was a humble nun, Roman Catholic nun from Albania, who became Mother Teresa when she moved to Calcutta. As one of the most revered religious icons of the century, her life is of interest to everyone. She won a Nobel Prize, and one of our members, Cynthia Egli, a past president, has a particular interest in Mother Teresa, and there's been quite a bit written about her lately because she is well on the way to sainthood. So welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you, George.
Can you give us some background on Mother Teresa and how she came to be so admired?
Certainly. Well, we'll start with the beginning. I mean, her name, she was born Agnes Gaunja Oyajizu in Skopje. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but that's in the Republic of Macedonia. Her parents were Albanian, and from very young she had this desire to become a nun, basically, to serve as a missionary, very much as a missionary, to spread God's word. So she had that in her mind from the beginning. And so at the age of 18, she joined an order, the Sisters of Loreto, was sent to Ireland to learn to speak English. And then from there, she was sent to India, where she became a teacher in a convent school, which generally in India apparently caters to the middle upper classes students. And she taught there for almost 20 years. I believe she was not just a teacher, but also maybe a director of the school or whatever. So she was there for a very long time. And in 1946, after she went on one of her annual retreats, because they have these retreats to refresh their spirituality and get their energy back and that kind of thing, she got what she called her call within a call. And she felt that God had spoken directly to her. Not so much God as Jesus, actually. During all that time, she was one of those who was very close in her experience with Jesus, and she felt like he was with her at all times. And she had a very full emotional experience of his presence in her life. And so that was very real for her, and she felt that he told her that he wanted her to go out among the poorest of the poor. So she did. She went out. She had to work for that. For about 2 years, she had to explain to the father, who was her spiritual director in that area, and also to the archbishop in that area about the call, and they had to kind of examine her and make sure she wasn't crazy or whatever, however they determined those things. And it took a while, but they eventually gave her permission to go ahead and do this. So she started her work in 1948. She went out on her own for a period of time. I don't know how long. And in the readings I've done, I don't really know what she did in the beginning or how that was. But in 1950, she actually founded the Missionaries of Charity, which eventually became an order that reports directly to the Pope. But at that time, it was not quite at that level. And she had 13 members of her order. And I don't know what work they did and how they grew during that period of time. It doesn't seem to be a lot written about what happened then. In the book that was written about her recently, in which they talk about her crisis of faith, as they say, later in her life, they mostly talk about that period in terms of her internal experience. So you don't really know what was happening. But in 1969, Malcolm Muggeridge found her. And he went there and he wrote a book and he made a film about the Home for the Dying, which is known there as Nirmal Hride. I don't know if that's how you say it exactly, but that's approximately it. And they did this film, and it was shown around the world, and she was suddenly famous everywhere. At the time, when they did this, the interior of Nirmal Hride is rather dark. And they took some film there. They didn't think it was going to turn out, but they decided to go ahead and try because they thought it would be too dark. And so they took some film, and lo and behold, they came back to the United States or wherever they went back to, and they developed it and everything. And it was pretty nice. It was quite clear. It was very nice light in it. And Muggeridge immediately exclaimed, "Ah, it's a miracle. It's the kindly light shining down," before the photographer could even speak up. So he kept his mouth shut and said later, "Well, actually we had some new film from Kodak, which was supposed to be more sensitive and work in darker areas, and we decided to give it a try, and well, it worked."
That's how a lot of miracles come about.
Yes, a lot of miracles are like that, but Muggeridge and many people still believe that that was some kind of a miracle, in other words, outside of normal physical reality, when truly it was just a new film. So at that point, her fame began to grow, and she got a lot more attention. In 1979, she got the Nobel Prize. In her speech to accept it, it was the Nobel Peace Prize, she said that abortion is the greatest destroyer of peace in the world, because if a mother can kill her own child, then what's to stop us from killing anybody?
Isn't it a little unusual that, isn't she an unlikely candidate for a Nobel Peace Prize?
It seems, from what little I read, because I didn't get that in depth, that a lot of what happens with Nobels is that people are nominated and pushed, and she got quite a bit of focus from the church on having her get this award.
The Nobel
Nobel
Prize has been given for political reasons in a lot of other situations, such as Kissinger got one. So, but it was the Roman Catholic Church that was directly promoting her, promoting her Catholic political agenda.
She'd begun to really amass a following of people who really admired her deeply, and so there were a lot of people to push her case. I mean, she had visits from, she went and visited and had visits from people like the Reagans when Reagan was president, and Princess Diana went there, and she met with Margaret Thatcher, and just the Clintons met with her too. There were just a whole bunch of major people that went to see her in her home for the dying, or that she came to see. And she got awards from all over the world. She got awards in India, and she got one from the Philippines, so that lots of awards. And many of them came with money. And the United States gave her an Order of Merit in 1983, so she came to the United States at that point to receive that. And then she was given honorary U.S. citizenship in 1996. She died in 1997, interestingly enough, in her own bedroom, surrounded by some $25,000 worth of medical equipment, which, of course, in India is more than it would be here. But which was interesting because when she was interviewed by the Ladies' Home Journal, she said that she would want to go back and die peacefully in her home for the dying. But no, that's not where she died. She died in her own room with lots and lots of medical care available to her, including pain medication.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment, medical care and pain medication. What exactly was Mother Teresa's mission as she saw it?
Well, her mission, the way she said it when she first left the convent to go out into the streets, was to give up everything and follow him, that's Jesus, into the slums, to serve him in the poorest of the poor. So that her vision was that as you serve the least of these, or as you have done this to the least of these, you have done it to me. So that kind of image of Jesus. But more clearly, very strongly, what she said was, and this was the reason for the founding of the Missionaries of Charity, it was to satiate the thirst of Jesus on the cross for love and souls. So she spoke a great deal of suffering and the beauty of suffering, and suffering because it brought you close to Jesus. And at times she spoke about the poor in terms of there were so many poor people, and it was beautiful how they suffered, and that suffering must be doing a lot of good for the world, which doesn't really quite seem the perspective I would have taken, but she seemed to see it that way. Some of her later letters that I found in the book that I read that I'll show you a little bit later, she mentions her desire to actually create saints. So it seems like some of her focus shifted a little bit towards the nuns and the brothers and the fathers that were in the various houses that she built in her order, Missionaries of Charity, to develop them into saints. So,
while delivering a lot of souls of the dying. To Jesus.
Souls of everybody.
Souls of everyone.
She wanted to deliver souls. That was very much her intent. And to give love, because love would deliver souls. So that was where her mission came from, really. And it's a very strong Roman Catholic kind of mission.
Well, I just wanted to emphasize, though, that mission says nothing about improving health.
No.
That mission says nothing about alleviating poverty.
No.
That mission says to bring the suffering and dying to Jesus.
Basically, yes. Now, she said at one point in time that the suffering, and especially the dying, would become better Muslims if they were Muslim, or better Hindus if they were Hindu. But the fact of the matter is, at least from the reports from volunteers who worked in these places, because most of the work was done by volunteers and still is, rather than by the nuns. But the reports are that the only religious materials allowed in her homes are Catholic, Christian religious materials. So it's not clear that she was really willing to allow people to have other faiths. She really wanted them to be Christian. And in her original, I can just show this book. This is Come Be My Light. This book is the one that came out recently that has stirred up so much, especially among a lot of atheists, about how she was really a closet atheist, that she had lost her faith, because this has a lot of her writings about that experience, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it also talks about her mission and the rules of her order. And the rules of her order do talk about going out into the community and finding people and helping them. And
now, the rules of her order must have been written by her.
Yes.
Were they not? Yes.
Yes, they were. And there was to be work in the villages. One of the things she commented on that I thought was very interesting in the beginning was that it was very important that her nuns would be local women, girls, and that they would speak the local language. And if they didn't know it, they would learn it. And one of the very interesting things about the Home for the Dying is that the nuns that are there are often from the villages, and they might speak Urdu or some other language. But Kolkata is in West Bengal, and the people there speak Bengali. So most of the people in the homes speak Bengali. And so either these people speak Urdu or English, but they don't speak Bengali. And so the people in that home, basically nobody knows what they're saying. And there doesn't seem to have been any effort to train these girls in how to speak the local language in the area that they're serving, even though that was early on one of her major ideas, was that the young women that joined the order would do that.
Now, what did they go out into the community to do? If it's not to alleviate poverty, and if it's not to improve health care and bring medicines to them, what exactly were they doing in the community?
Well, in some ways, she said that they were going to do things like that they would help feed them and things like that, and they would take children in and educate them and such. But a lot of it was to be comforting, to show them the light of Jesus and the love of Jesus, and to bring souls to Jesus. And there was a focus for her and with her sisters in this sharing this experience of the poorest of the poor as part of their process of becoming closer to Jesus. And in some cases, it seemed that their focus was so not on improving a person's health that they just simply weren't doing that. It may have been in the original rules of the order, but we can get into that here on some of the criticisms people have had about the work that she did.
Right.
There's no question about how deeply she was committed to what she was doing, no question about how hard she worked, no question about how she could be cheerful at all times to all people if that's what she wanted to do. She apparently had an amazing presence for many people. It was just incredible when they met her. But I think things may have changed for her from the moment she became famous, because after Something Beautiful for God, she began to travel, and she was traveling almost all the time. And in her book, Come Be My Light, she often refers to how she doesn't want to travel. She wants to stay with her sisters. But she'll go if the Pope or whoever says she should go, and they, of course, always tell her that she should go. And so in the end, she was only spending maybe a couple of months in Kolkata.
She was a great propaganda machine for the church.
She was fabulous in that sense.
And fundraiser.
Yes, and I was going to get to that. One of the criticisms is that she raised millions and millions of dollars. There was a young woman who was a nun in one of the homes in New York who actually worked on the money. The money would come in and they'd write thank you letters. And she said they would probably take in $50 million a year. What was interesting about that was that Mother Teresa's idea about the money was that that was a sign of God's favor. It didn't mean she was to use it. She clearly used it to open new homes. But once a home was opened, the missionaries of charity were expected to support themselves by doing work, making things they could sell, things like that, and begging. A lot of them did a lot of begging. If she wanted something like a building or property, she would go to the city government or wherever she was and just beg for the property and make them feel so badly if they didn't give it to her that she got an awful lot of free property, buildings, food, all kinds of things. So she had all this money, and we aren't really sure where it went. One of the things this woman said is that she received huge numbers of checks for large dollar amounts at one period of time for the children who were starving in Ethiopia. They would have it written on the check for the children of Ethiopia. And she asked, her superiors what she should do about that. And they said, well, nothing. Well, shouldn't we make a list of how much money has been donated for that purpose? Well, no. So what they did is they wrote thank you notes saying that, they'd received their money and it would go to the children in Ethiopia, but they didn't even know how much money was supposed to go there, let alone send any there. So it's not clear that any went there.
So if there had been any financial accounting, there could have been charges of fraud in the collection of money.
There could possibly be, and one of the interesting things is that even in Kolkata, where it's required for charitable organizations to report the sources of their funds and the uses of their funds, her monies are not public information. You are not allowed to get that information. So she's managed to, or the order has managed to hide it, and no one really knows.
Right. And I think that the reason that most people would be donating money to Mother Teresa isn't to make people more comfortable when they're dying. I would think that most people giving money would have the expectation they're serving public health, that she's going to take this money and build a hospital, actually provide medical treatment, medical care for people, help people recuperate from whatever ailments they have. And she never did any of that, did she? Not
entirely. That's not entirely true.
Okay.
She frequently referred to her hospitals, definitely in the plural, in Kolkata. She did not have any. She did have the Home for the Dying. She had some orphanages. She, at one point, had a home for lepers and things like this. So she did open some of these. But her focus in the Home for the Dying was it was only for people who were dying. Now, if somebody got admitted who wasn't actually dying, they would not get any medical treatment. So they would get to stay until they did die. But they had, in the orphanages, they would have children who had medical issues that they would not treat, or they would treat in a very limited manner. She, before she went out on the streets, she got some training in nursing, 3 months, in 1949. And as far as I know, she had none after that. And of course, we know what's happened in medical care since then. And the order doesn't seem to really know a lot of the things that have been learned since then. So, for example, at the Home for the Dying, when they have to give people shots, which they do, for one thing, the only pain medication they give is aspirin. They do not have any opiates or anything that really deals with severe pain. So when these people are in really major pain, they don't have anything to help them.
Because Mother Teresa thought the pain was a beautiful thing that they should offer to Jesus.
It was redemptive. She sat by one woman who was dying in considerable pain and said, well, Jesus is kissing you because you're having such suffering, you are very close to Jesus. And the woman said, well, you tell him to stop kissing me. So she didn't seem to think that was what she wanted. Now, the interesting thing is, too, is that she only took people in who were alone. If they had any family, whether that family was nearby or willing to do anything for the person or not, if they had any family, they were not allowed in. If it turned out they had family, their family was not allowed to visit them because they were not supposed to have family. So the people were there in the home for the dying, and they had many of them with just small amounts of space in this room, and they had these narrow pallets that were covered with plastic. They all wore the same thing. They had their heads shaved. They had a latrine that was basically open. Men and women used the same one in the full view of everybody else. They weren't allowed to move around. They had to just stay on their pallets all the time. They have numbers on the wall to identify them, not their names. And there's just a lot of things about the place that most of us would find humiliating and degrading. It would not be considered meeting human rights.
They didn't even have a chair in them, right?
No. And so the thing was that for a lot of the people who worked there, because like I said, most of the work was done by volunteers, and many of them would say wonderful things about it. But of course, we know how groupthink affects people. If you see something that doesn't seem right, but everybody around you seems to think it's okay, most people will say, oh, it must be okay. And I think that that's one of the things that was happening. And they would think, well, these people are very poor, they're dying anyway, this is better than doing it on the streets.
Well, I read, too, that when a person was dying, Mother Teresa would ask them if they wanted to ensure that they would go to heaven when they die. And they would agree, and she would then baptize them without even them being aware from their own religious traditions that she was performing a sacrament from a Christian tradition. And so she felt in her own mind that she was bringing them to Christianity. Now, to us as atheists, of course, the whole thing seems like just a silly ritual that of no significance. But to the people to whom she was doing this would amount to religious thuggery.
Absolutely. And in fact, that was very, very much hidden, if it happened at all, in Calcutta, because the city is mostly Hindu, maybe 25% Muslim, and a very small percentage of anything else. Catholics, very, very small percentage. And if the Hindus and Muslims became aware that people were being baptized, especially without knowing they were, it would have been massive, the upset and the riots that could have occurred. So she was very careful not to let that out. Similar to her position on abortion and contraception, which in the city of Calcutta very much supports free access to contraception and abortion. And she opposed it everywhere in the world, but she didn't say anything about it in Calcutta because she knew people would not accept that in that city.
So what, did you have other impacts on the city of Calcutta?
In terms of help, it wasn't particularly noticeable. They have a lot of charitable activities going on there. Major organization, the Ramakrishna Mission, did immense amounts of work in terms of feeding the poor. They have lots of suffering during times with floods, and there were floods all the time. There's like one flood where she actually helped out a little bit. She had a soup kitchen. All the rest of the floods, she didn't. And these other missions, in one case, the money was raised by the sex workers. They went around collecting money to feed the people who were suffering because of the floods. So there are a lot of other charitable organizations working in the city with less money and doing far more. A lot of them have educational programs to, help women especially support themselves and things like that in schools where they really teach kids things. She had schools, but she taught them to read and write, do math, and read the Bible, basically, and understand the catechism. She was very focused on the catechism. One of the things that was very frustrating for the people of Calcutta is that she seems to have been involved in this image problem that they have, where the whole world thinks that this is an absolute dump, that the whole city is a slum, people are dying all over the streets, there's sickness everywhere you look, and it's a horrible, awful place that no one would want to go. Well, this is not true, at least from what I'm reading and what a lot of the people from the city are saying, is it was known as the City of Palaces. It was the capital of the Raj when the British were in charge. It's a beautiful city, and it has all the wonderful things that a great city would have. The slums are about the same as the ones in New Delhi, and that's a lot less than the slums in Bombay. So it's really not any worse than any other city, but that's probably damaged the city because tourists don't want to come.
Sure. You've brought along a couple of other books. Would you like to show them to the audience? And,
sure. This
comment on
one,
them?
this is a book by Christopher Hitchens, and it has his summary of the things that he's learned that are serious concerns about Mother Teresa's approach to things. It's an interesting book. He's very strong in his opinions and the way he says them. This book is called The Final Verdict, Mother Teresa, The Final Verdict. This one's written by Arup Chatterjee, who's a Calcuttan. And he lived in her neighborhood, and he would go around and he would ask the poor in the neighborhood what she did, and they didn't know. And he tried to get a person dying on the streets picked up by them, but they couldn't do that. They had to tell him to wait until morning to call the city ambulance to pick the person up and bring them to the home for the dying and things like that. So he has personal experience. He also knows what goes on in the city, and he writes about that. The people who write their criticisms about her feel very strongly, and they speak very strongly in such a way that one sometimes gets the feeling that they have a case. And that doesn't really serve them very well.
She's going through the process. She's already been beatified by the Roman Catholic Church.
Yep.
Going through the process on an accelerated track.
Absolutely, fastest ever.
To sainthood. And I know this is a very unusual question to be asking an atheist.
An atheist.
But, first off, the Church has done away with the role of
The
devil's advocate.
Yep.
And the only person testifying against her canonization was Christopher Hitchens. They did interview him.
They did interview him. They did interview Arup Chatterjee. They've interviewed others.
Okay.
But it was interesting to read in the book how they focused the questions that they asked him, and he could only answer those questions, and they were things like, well, was she a virgin? Was she submissive? Did she always obey the orders of the Church and things like that? Of course, all of those you could say yes.
Well, from an atheist perspective, and we only have a minute left.
Yes.
Should she be canonized?
She should be canonized.
Regarded
she
as an
certainly
icon?
should, because the Roman Catholic Church defines the conditions under which a person is canonized. They define the qualities, and she meets all of them. She was a virgin. That was absolutely essential. She worked long and hard for the Church. She always obeyed. And those were the things that really matter to them.
So there we have it, a saint for the Roman Catholic Church. But if one really looks at the consequential results of the work that she did, there are great questions of whether she made, in fact, a positive contribution to the poor, to those whom she was directly serving, and to the world itself. And yet she's held up as an icon of sainthood in the world. That concludes tonight's program. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you, George.
For that presentation. And I'm George Kane, and if you're interested in us, we're interested in you.